I don't know how ethical it is to have you here while there's food actually sitting there and doing a talk, but we'll get through and I'll try to get through it as quick as I can. So my name is Glen Holmes. I'm the VP of Product at Case, which means I get the pleasure of working with Vitaly, who seems to have his fan club here. But I'm going to talk about a topic today that it's very prevalent at the moment. It's becoming very ubiquitous, but it's not new, and that is ethics in product development and thinking beyond the code. Before we start, I'm going to ask a question to the audience, so you guys have to participate, right? So what would you consider the greatest invention in humankind? Language? Mm-hmm.
Paper.
Any other technologies? Anyone? No wrong answers.
Because I think language is maybe not an invention, I'd say writing there.
Yeah, writing.
Zero,
That's a good point.
0 and 1.
0 and 1. Very good. Fire. Yeah. Usually people, mathematics. So usually people, now think about a technology. I know they are technologies. What would you think has been a great kind of, I suppose, enhancement to humankind?
Atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
I think you know what you mean.
Yeah.
There's a,
No? Yeah. I'm gonna give you there's something that's really changed the world. And a lot of, I suppose, the advances we have now, like in medicines and computing and AI, is actually manifest from this invention. And it was invented about 575 kilometers from here, in a town called Mainz. And it is the printing press. All right, Gutenberg's printing press. Okay, so prior to the printing press, to have knowledge, to have books was, restricted to nobility, to aristocrats. Okay, the only way you could basically acquire knowledge was being born into the family. The common person didn't read or write, very rarely read. Gutenberg's printing press democratized knowledge. All of a sudden, every town had books containing different types of knowledge in it, and people then started to learn to read. So it became much more, permeated society much more, the actual art of reading and the art of books. Now question, what do you think was the most popular book in the centuries after Gutenberg's press was invented? Very good, the Bible. A lot of people get that. What do you think was the second most popular book? This is a harder question. Sorry? Wasn't actually, yeah. No. No one ever gets this, right? And you probably haven't heard of it. It's a book called Malleus Maleficarum, which literally translates as the Hammer of Witches. And then again, with this very German team here, it was another German. He was a Dominican friar. His name was Heinrich Kramer, and he was crazy, really crazy. And he had an obsession. He was, if all cares purpose, he was a bit of a pervert, right? He had a real obsession about women, particularly, and the sexual tendencies of women. And prior to the late 15th century, basically witches were everyone knew what witches were, but they were kind of a nonsense. They were fairy stories. No one really cared about witches. They weren't minded. Because he was became obsessed, particularly with a woman, I won't go too deep into it, but he basically said that the degradation of society and its morality was because of women's promiscuity, right? So women who decided to speak up even, but people to have sexual relations with people, were the cause of all the evil. And he said they had a pact with the devil, and he claimed they wrote their name on his anus, right? That they kept a nest full of penises in trees. This is the type of thing he said about these women, right? And he called them witches. And no one paid any attention to him. He was nuts. He was crazy. He tried to bring a woman he was obsessed with to court, claiming she was a witch, and the magistrate threw it out, saying, "You're nuts." And then he also the church itself dismissed him and said, "You're crazy. You just go off on your lunacy." But then what happened was Gutenberg's press was invented, and he wrote a book, and he wrote this book called Malleus Maleficarum, which is how to spot a witch, capture a witch, imprison a witch, and torture a witch and kill a witch, right? All about witches, right? Now that became basically, as I say, the second most popular book in Europe in the Middle Ages. And it traveled over to the New World in America. So the Salem witch trials. So this led to about 200, 300 years of, it was a really misogynistic book. And it led to about 200 or 300 years of persecution of women across Europe in the Middle Ages. Like people were burnt at the stake, imprisoned, right? A real kind of, terrible time to be a woman in the world around this time. And a lot of it manifests from this book, The Hammer of Witches. So what does that kind of got to do with ethics? Well, it's because we never really understand the consequences of anything that we develop. And for everything good that comes and emanates from any development or technology, there is a consequence to it. And like way up the point that Gutenberg's press gave this, huge opportunity to the world, social mobility through being able to read and write, and then all the advances. If you think the printing press led on to the Enlightenment, to the Renaissance, to the Industrial Revolution, to the technological revolution, all these great leaps of innovation, but it also had sinister basically repercussions due to nefarious acts by these type of individuals, such as Kramer. So when we think about ethics, there's kind of two kind of schools of thought that we need to think about when we're working in development products. First is categoricalism, okay? So again, going Germanic, we're talking about Immanuel Kant, a very famous philosopher. And he said, in his categorical imperative, he says that if an action is not right for everyone, it is not right for anyone. So if everybody can't take the action, you don't just have one person. It's not like this elite can do this and the rest of us must act in a different way. He says, no, if an action cannot be taken by everybody, it cannot be taken by one person. Then we go on, we move to France, so René Descartes. So, I think, therefore I am person. So his categorical imperative was, if an action cannot be taken repeatedly, it should never be taken once. Now, how many times do we kind of, particularly QA, there's lots of bugs. We'll just release this. We won't do the next release with those bugs. We'll fix that technical debt. We'll just do it this one time, right? And then what happens? The next time we do it. So he said, if an action cannot be taken repeatedly, it shouldn't be taken once. And that's the categorical imperative. Categorically, you can't do it. That's where it comes from. Second school of thought is consequentialism, generally defined by utilitarianism. So defining the maximum utility. And this is much more the way, I believe, kind of software development tends to work, which is basically Jeremy Bentham, who's the father of utility. He says that the greatest happiness for the greatest number, okay? So basically you maximize utility. There are consequences to what you do, but if we serve the masses and it's more positive for the masses, then if there's a consequence to the individual, some individuals, we'll accept that, right? We maximize utility. John Stuart Mill said all action is for the sake of some end. So essentially that's being kind of adapted to the means, the end justifies the means. Okay, so once the outcome is positive and it leads to a positive action in society, then we are willing to accept some consequences along the way. Okay? Poll, who thinks they're categoricalist? You just categorically should not do anything. But action cannot be repeated. It should never be done once. Say that? So people know. Who thinks they're more utilitarian? The ends justify the means. It's okay, we have consequences, but as long as we are positive to the greater amount of society, it's a good thing. And there's always going to be consequences. You think that? Okay, it's very difficult, very difficult. Now, I'm going to do a thought experiment, and you've probably listened a million times, but there's a reason we'll do it again. The trolley problem? Have you come across the trolley problem? Yeah? For those of you, some of you have some hands. I'm going to just indulge me for a moment and I'll ask this, all right? So the trolley problem is a famous thought experiment. And it is to think about putting you in a situation. Your first situation, you are the driver of a trolley, right? The trolley is out of control. The brakes don't work. You're on a track. You're heading down that track. You can't stop it. It's speeding. And in front of you in the track, there are 5 people working on the track. Okay, and those 5 people are digging away. They've got soundproof headphones on. They can't hear the train coming. You're beeping the horn. There's nothing you do. You can't get their attention. It's hurtling towards them. Now, on the track, there is a side track. And on that side track, there is one person working, right? Same thing. They're digging away with the headphones on, I should say. And the only way you can divert, there is a switch in the train that will switch it to the other track. Okay? So instead of going straight and hurtling to the 5 people, there's a switch that will divert it and hit the one person, right? We all know the question. Who would flick the switch? No, just hands up. Just don't worry. So there's usually more. Okay, that's fine. So who put their hand up for flicking a switch? Not you. So gentleman there, why would you flick the switch? Yeah, yeah. So you're sacrificing the one to save the many. Makes sense. It's utility there, right? Who wouldn't? Who said they wouldn't? Why wouldn't you?
Because if that one person is related to me, then
Yeah. No, that's a fine answer.
That's utilitarianism as well.
Yeah. Do you? Anyone else for not flicking the switch?
well, I would argue. I'm not sure what I would do actually, but the argument maybe for not doing it is you don't want to do anything. You do not want to be.
So the action, but by not doing something, you're doing something, right?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah. Sorry, there's someone down there. Their hand.
This person is really nice. Those
Reductio.
But you don't know.
takers.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
There is another option, actually. We can switch really,
Yes.
so we will break the main.
Okay. Well, we can try that. We can try that. Okay. So we see that, right? Second scenario is trolleys going along, same things, trams going along full speed, but instead of it being driven by you, it's actually unmanned, right? There's nobody, it's an automated train, it's flying, the brakes are stopping. And you're actually witnessing this from a bridge over the track. You're shouting to the people going, the trolley's coming, the trolley's coming. They can't hear you. There's only one track, there's 5 people on that track. There's no side track, one track, 5 people. Standing with you on the bridge is a very, very large man. And they're looking over the bridge. And if you just did that and pushed them, they'd land on the track, the train would hit them, divert, and you'd save the 5 people. Who would push the man? Now, I want to ask the people who said they'd flick the switch, who didn't put their hands up for pushing the man, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you push the man?
Or now I have to. What's on his switch now?
So it's a switch. So it's the act of pushing somebody. But the outcome's the same, right?
Outcome is the same, but you can argue that you'll be convicted of murder if you do this push. If you go back to the previous example, you're going to be committed of murder anyway. In both cases.
But it's, you didn't say it. So I'll ask you, okay, so I get the push, right? I'll change it. The man's standing on a trapdoor and you press the button and the trapdoor will open and you'll fall down onto the track and do it.
Thing, you're pushing it.
Yeah. So the point of the conversation, right, it's a thought experiment, right? I think it was invented by Jim Cole in the 60s, this, right? There's always these questions. It goes on forever. We're not going to solve it here tonight. Certainly not. I'm not going to solve it. I'm not classes of philosophical enough. But
yes, the man that you sacrifice. I mean, they were not in danger, right? In this particular case, both the people are in danger, and you have to.
But the guy in the track wasn't. The guy in the side track wasn't in danger either. He was just going along. It was the guys in front were in danger.
People would die. Yeah, people will die anyway, right? In this particular case, this guy
So people die anyway in the second scenario.
cannot cry.
I mean, we are only talking about one direction. The train is coming. One.
Yeah.
And if I look at it, the train is going in the other direction. These 2 books, they are lying on the track.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. There's many ways, but the point of the thought experiment is that it is very, very difficult to say you're consequential or you're utilitarianism. The context matters. That's why we call it a moral compass. It can set in one direction, but it can move to another. Morality and ethics are all intertwined, but they're not actually the same. So it's very, very difficult, right? It's very easy to sit there and judge something on their ethics. When you're in that situation, it can be very, very difficult to understand. You do. And we've all got this. So this matters, and it matters a lot, okay? But I'm going to come to a more modern day philosopher, right? Dr. Ian Malcolm of Jurassic Park. So in 1993, in the movie, he said something that's really profound that I think really resonates with how we build products today. And it is the scientists who were bioengineering dinosaurs who ate everybody. They were so preoccupied about whether they could, they didn't think about whether they should. And I think that's a really, really important point to think about when we're developing anything, okay? Because we do rush to see, it's like a challenge, can we do this? And we should step back and say, should we do this, okay? So I'm going to give you some examples of ethics. And again, we're the German team. theme, we're going to look at Volkswagen. So we know about the Volkswagen emission scandal we've heard about over the years, where they wrote code to, basically decrease the emission count so that when they got there was an import tax based on emissions and they paid less for import in the cars, so it became cheaper, but they weren't ruining the environment. Okay. Cambridge Analytica, people know that's very prominent in Britain and Ireland, right? But they were manipulating people, particularly around the Brexit vote. Bots, disinformation, targeting people who are more prone to believe in things, etc., and spreading information. And they were subsequently caught that, and the company unfolded. And we know Theranos. So Elizabeth Holmes, no relation, thank God. Falsifying blood counts. So think about that. Like, if people going in for a blood test and they give them false results that were nonsense, and people could get cancer or disease, like really, really unethical thing to do. But when we talk about these things, we tend to say Volkswagen and Cambridge Analytica and Theranos as if these companies are like faceless corporations, that they're like Volkswagen's making a decision or Cambridge Analytica is making a decision about being unethical. But actually it's people. People make decisions about what products they deliver, okay? But it's really, really hard for people within organizations to say, oh, well, I don't think this is right and I want to walk, right? I'm not on for this, right? Because you lose your job. We've families to feed, right? We've bills to pay. So, we can all be kind of like categorical, but then, I like the check at the end of the month, don't I? And, and you can justify things in many ways, okay? Trying to find good ethical practices in companies. I actually researched this. There are very few. There are very few strong examples of ethical practices in companies. A lot of people have their social corporate responsibility and they have it up on their websites and all, but really strong ethical practices. I found one where there's a Swedish newspaper who had a paywall, and during the coronavirus pandemic, they stopped charging everybody because they said the information about the pandemic and the information was more important for public basically good than them getting money. But there are very few I can think of. So whose responsibility is ethics then? How do we build ethical products? Okay? Do we write for corporations? No, they're not going to do it. As I said, like McDonald's looking after your cow, right? It's useless, it's a waste of time. It's maximizing shareholder value, that's what most. Now, I know some of us might work for more ethical organizations than others. You might work for non-profits and things like that. But generally, the type of corporations we're talking about building large software products and software products that are getting great traction and virality, particularly in the AI world, they're not going to self-regulate, and that just doesn't work, okay? So what about regulators? Now, AI, that's the elephant in the room here, right? But when you think about ethics and what's happening in the world, and particularly the kind of highlight of ethics at the moment is being driven a lot by AI practices. So, as people hear that the EU AI Act has gone into force this year, so I follow this a lot now. The caveat, I'm not a lawyer, but I do study this a lot. And I start to look, there's been proposals, it's been reproposed, the EU AI Act, right? And I won't go through these a lot, but what I want to highlight is this change in dilution. So the original AI Act was designed, to enforce AI responsibility. What's happened is that corporations have lobbied, particularly big US corporations, and, threatened to pull out jobs and threatened as they do, and or pay people a lot of money. And we're seeing things like the dates of implementation moving. So the latest one is moving from August 2026 to December 2027. Okay, so things like this is really interesting one. Registration for high risk AI derogation, that's being removed. So if you're in a high risk AI company, so you do things like biometrics or health or military, you had to register your technology, right? And you had to basically give the regulators the model and basically see how it's trained and all. Now you don't even have to have risk. It's self-regulating. You can basically register if you want, but it's not required. So who's going to do it? But one of the things to take from this all, if anyone's interested in this, I don't want to bore people with legal stuff, but it's the last one, the new GDPR Article 88C, right? Sounds like, wow, that sounds really interesting. But this confirms a thing called legitimate interest as a legal basis, right? Now what that is that when you process data, right, there's a number of reasons why you're allowed to do that, right? You can enforce data. Generally, consent is the most or why you can do that. Consent is the most obvious, right? So you give consent to somebody to process your data. Another one might be seeing in the pursuit of justice. So if you're a law enforcement agency and somebody's, you're trying to find, capture a criminal, you can use things like location data and things like that, if they're on trial. So that's a pursuit of justice. But it's really strict in GDPR world. However, with AI, what they're calling now is a catch-all for legitimate interest. Now, legitimate interest is basically anything. Legitimate interest is saying, well, we as a company have legitimate interest in processing the data of this individual. So you go for an interview with somebody, right? Now, if anyone's been in an interview where after you get offered a job, you say, well, we have to do a background check, but you have to consent to that. And in some countries, they don't allow you to do that. Particularly even in Ireland, it's very, very restricted about what you can find out about somebody. But they can say, well, no, we can actually, even prior, or just when we're screening potential candidates, it's legitimate interest. So this is a really, really dangerous wording in this document, right? And to me, it's incredibly unethical that any even legislator would consider this. So it's really, really important that we look at who's going to police or who's going to be responsible for ethics. Is it corporations? No. Is it regulators? By the looks of this, no, right? So it's you. It's people in this room. Now that might seem daunting, right? Because I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell my company, oh, let's be ethical, right? And I'm going to be the person shouting at the cloud, no, it's not going to. But there are ways of doing it, and there's practices in how we can build more ethical products. It's really difficult, right? And I've seen cases recently where we have whistleblowers in Facebook. I think the person who, I can't remember the guy's name, he whistleblew about the impact, they knew about the impact of social media on children and their mental health, and they discarded that, and he was fired. And the same, somebody in Google had a issue with Gemini and its biases, and they got fired. So again, we've all jobs. It's hard to speak up. But how we do that is we instill a sense of ethics within our projects. And like the kind of Gutenberg Bible, like not quite, we don't want to be quite like Heinrich Kramer and his hammer of witches, but ideas and practice permeate, right? When we start with them, they permeate within organizations. So how do we do that? Well, it's a 6-step ethical framework that you use, that everyone can use when in development, right? So you're sitting in your sprint planning meetings, or you're sitting in your reviews or anything like that. You're looking at requirements and you're thinking about what test case we have to write or what code we have to write. This is how you can influence it. So you ask things. Rule 1, identify any ethical issue or problem that might manifest as a result of your initiative. So ask this: if the product were wildly successful, is there anything that might go wrong? Right? So Gutenberg could have asked that. He would have noticed, right, there's probably crazy people who might write crazy books that might cause problems for society. Okay. Now, it's really difficult to think of everything, but asking the question is a start. And it doesn't mean if there's a bad outcome that we don't do it. Remember, we can be utilitarian in it. We say, is what we do, is there more pros than cons, essentially? Okay. So, examples with bias in algorithms, over surveillance. So like the example used there, the higher algorithm, one issue might be inherent bias against certain demographics due to historical training there. And that has happened recently. Doing that, actually a case came up where, I know this research is being done, but your Christian name, particularly in America, has a lot to do with your propensity to being hired. So there was a set of twins who were, I think they were African-American, and one of them was called Peter, had a real English name, and the other had a Jamal, kind of more, and they went for a job, and Peter was exponentially more likely to get an interview than Jamal was, even though they had the same grades, went to the same school, and everything. So there are inherent biases even in algorithms. 2 is identify anyone who might be affected by your innovation and how. Okay, so think about this. Who does this affect? What we are doing tomorrow, if we're passing on, this goes from quality to coding to requirements, right? Basically, users are obvious, but non-users, right? Who do we exclude from users? So think about, we need to get to market quickly, right? The MVP, we won't do accessibility. Never mind about accessibility. So think of people that you're kind of ostracizing by not including accessibility in your product, right? And it's not saying, again, we don't do it, but highlighting this starts to kind of make people think about how they develop, okay? Their employees, environment, like we talk about, particularly in AI, right? And data computing, and like the amount of energy we're using for for running our models is really not, is it come from renewable sources, right? So think about that, right? 3, identify which affected party would want, what if each affected party wanted to do about the issue, okay? So what would they want us to do? If the party, if the problem manifests, right, what would they want us to do about it? So think about people, survey, interview, proxies, right? So class example is job interviews, particularly like AI screening. Why did I not get the job? Why was I not passed? Being very transparent. If we're going to use these type of technology, how can we be more transparent with people? And how can we be more trusting to people, okay? 4, identify the options you can reasonably take. So don't jump to solutions, right? And don't say, yes, we'll do it, no. But can we put guardrails in place? Can we delay? So in the case of an accessibility omission, can we delay the release to include accessibility? How long would it take? How does that manifest in us? Asking these questions are really important, okay? It's really important. Number 5 is identify the potential consequences of your options, right? Because we can be categorical and we can be consequential and we can think about that. Should we just definitely not do this because it's the wrong thing to do, regardless of, it's going to move, it's going to reduce our churn rate, it's going to improve our MRR. Is it just the wrong thing to do, right? Or is it like, yes, we understand these issues, but again, the pros outweigh the cons, so we should go ahead with it, right? So we need to think about the long-term consequences and the intended versus unintended ones, right? And 6, determine a course of action, okay? So take into account, it's not just about business value and ROI immediately, right? It's longer term, ethics, right? What happens? You might make money very quickly, but if you erode shareholder trust through poor quality of a product, that's an ethical thing. If you release a product with poor quality, people are paying for that product and using that product, and they're not getting their value out of it. That's an ethical issue, right?
Churn as well.
And they will churn, yeah. So it's there's a long-term effect of all this. So it's not just like ethics to be nice. There is actually an ROI of ethics that we need to build in. We need to understand that, okay? And the big thing about this, and this is where, when I came into an organization, we'll talk about it, was a very large American company, and we kind of started using this framework. And one of the things that came out, which is really good, that it wasn't, we didn't turn into this really super nice company, like really quickly, but we documented everything. Everything, the decisions we made were documented, why we went ahead of something, what we considered. We did the ethical framework, we filled out this template, and this became the kind of de facto thing for every team in the company to do, to fill this out, to understand the decisions we made. And it was really good to go back and, when something happened, to go back and say, well, that was the decision we made at that time, and we made it on this data, and, we highlighted this issue and it manifested, so maybe we need to get better. And, so it's a kind of self-improving process. But that, it's 6 easy questions. They don't take a long time. But if we start even in our team to think about this, I guarantee you, it'll start to permeate through the organization, and it will start to improve, particularly the quality and the kind of outcomes of your product. So in summary, ethics, it's an ambiguous and complex topic, right? It's centuries debates. I mean, going back to Aristotle and Plato and all those, and we still find it difficult to understand. So don't worry about it, doing the trolley thought experiment tonight. We are consequential, we are categorical, it depends, okay? It's difficult to evaluate the consequences of your product, but people very rarely even try to do that. And that's the issue. Right? We rush to solutions as a species, right? We listen to reply rather than listen to understand. You know that, right? So we get that systems thinking where we just, we want to do it. It looks like a great problem. I'll solve that problem. Just take a step back and think about the consequences. Even doing that will help you build better software products. Good people can do bad things, right? The people even in Volkswagen, in Cambridge Analytica, Theranos, really decent people. They were like, oh God, I know this is probably wrong, but it can't be that bad because leadership are doing it, and we'll just do it this once, right? An action that can't be done repeatedly should not be done once. So they're not inherently evil people, but they can do bad things, right? Don't rely on organization and regulators to define ethical products. It's just not going to happen. Use a consistent approach. Even if you're not using the 6-step, just use a consistent approach to it. Ask those questions and ask them all the time and ask them constantly. And I guarantee you, right, you will start to understand and build better products, and even not ethically better products, better quality products. It will happen. And just simply do no evil, right? And that was Google's mantra. You know, it was probably, but it is still important to just be good, be decent, right? And good does have its you know, compass, as I say, good or bad. It's not binary. But I think, you know, it sounds utopian. It sounds difficult to do, but it can be done. I've actually been part of an organization that implemented this, and we definitely built better products. I'm part of an organization now that does it to try to build better products. So might say it's utopian, but it is actually doable. That's it. That's the end of my talk. I thank you for coming and thank you for listening to me. And now you can go and have food, because I know your stomachs are always there. So thank you, folks. Cheers.